Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health. Join us as we try out new things, or as we call it, weird shit, and have some fun along the way. Today, Trish and I talk about heart rate variability, what it is, how it's measured, and what impacts it. We also discuss coherence, personal coherence and interpersonal. I hope that you enjoy today's episode. Let's get going. Hey, Trish.
Hey,
All right. What are we talking about today? It's just you and me today.
what I always thought was interesting is we throw out the word health. And for the most part, the definition has been an absence of disease, which is pretty, benign. Okay, so I have to have a formal diagnosis to be considered not healthy. But at the same time, what's being used to actually determine and measure that? Because I feel like a lot of the things that are used to measure our health, so being that we need to have a diagnosis, right, to be considered not healthy, we would therefore have to go to the doctor. We'd have to be exhibiting signs and symptoms. We'd probably have to have labs drawn, a physical done. And in their opinion, say, okay, you're not healthy because you have this disease. But I feel like, at least for me, and I think a lot of people, we may not feel 100%, or we know we could feel better, but we don't have a formal disease, like the chronic exhaustion, the stress, maybe the anxiety, which, yes, you could probably throw a pill for, which we talked about wasn't really our jam. Or you just feel like you can't sleep or you can't relax. So what happens when you're just not feeling as well as you wish you could, or as well as you think you should feel?
Yeah, it's interesting that to define health, we're talking about the absence of disease, and you're not really describing what you have, but what you don't have, right?
Mhm.
And so with that, then that takes away from, in my mind, if you're healthy, you should physically, emotionally, spiritually be thriving. And that means that you are embodying, you have something. What is that something? What is that health? It's not an absence of cancer or heart disease, right? I think that socially we struggle with how we define health. We have, in that attempt to define it, we look at certain indicators like our height and our weight, our BMI, our blood pressure. We also divorce ourselves from other indicators that our body is telling us, the anxiety, the fatigue, because that's much more difficult to measure. We don't have a machine that we can put on somebody's arm and it'll tell us what your anxiety is.
I mean, we've definitely moved leaps and bounds with these biofeedback tools. We can measure people's blood pressure at home. You can measure your heart rate if you wanted to. We could take the number of steps, and you could see your total number of hours of sleep. But the question really is that with all these different indicators, which one should we be paying attention to? Why should we be paying attention to it? It's almost like another information overload, right? And then of these indicators, are focusing on any of these truly helping me with what I possibly want to achieve?
Biotech industry, with all of the different types of wearables that are out on the market, can really provide an array of different ways that you can monitor different aspects of your health, which is cool and exciting for those of us who really like data. But for those who are not really data driven, I could see how that would be overwhelming.
Well, and I think another positive piece to it as well is that anyone who is ready to make a change, you want something measurable when you're trying to make a change, especially if you're taking those first couple steps. I don't know about you, but like the first time I started trying to meditate, I was like, am I doing this right? I don't feel any different. Is this doing anything? And I really didn't know. Looking back, I wish I had a tool that was telling me, like, oh, yes, you're doing it right. Keep going. Because there is this point where you feel the difference, you feel the shift. And I'm saying that broadly, right? Anytime that we're making a change, we're going through the motions, we're doing it, we're keeping consistent. And then there's a point where something shifts and you're like, oh, I see it now. I'm seeing the fruits of my labor. And I know I had that experience with meditation. And I'm just speaking to it because I think a lot of people have tried meditation because you're told it's good and you're told you should do it to relax. And that's a whole nother conversation piece. However, something as abstract as that would be wonderful to have a tool that would tell you, oh, I am moving the needle. And what I think is cool is that we have some different tools that are helping move some of these needles that are relatively new.
Yes, I initially started to track not only my steps, but my sleep with a smart watch. And that watch told me different phases of sleep, how long I slept, how many times I woke up during the night. And that was pretty fascinating to me. That was really where I started to look at some of the different ways that technology could give me some feedback. As I started to go down that journey of what I'm tracking, what my wearable is tracking for me, I noticed that it was talking to me about heart rate variability. And I really didn't know anything at all about heart rate variability. I felt like that was not even really something that I learned in nursing school. Did you?
No.
No, I was like, "What is HRV?" And I
Mhm.
had to do a search on the interwebs to find out what exactly HRV was and why should I care about it.
Yeah, so my story is a little different. So I am in the middle of a doctoral program with Quantum University for integrative medicine. And the purpose of this is really to start to change our aspects and thoughts of health to really help people reach their full health potential. And there was a course on different biofeedback tools. And there was also a whole section as well on heart rate variability, specifically looking at the research that's done by the Heart Math Institute. So, the Heart Math Institute is actually a nonprofit research and education organization, and they really are looking to put out different tools and techniques to help people decrease the stress and increase their own balance, creativity, and intuition. So, interestingly enough, I did not know that you also before very recently were working with heart rate variability. But when I started utilizing their inner balance, I remember looking at it and being like, ooh, this is interesting. Seeing how my body was truly responding to some of the different breathing meditations that I was doing. I
Do
would put it
you
on during my meditation.
Yeah, that's cool. Should we tell our audience if they don't know what heart rate variability is?
Yeah. So heart rate variability, it's a measure of neurocardiac function that reflects the heart brain interaction as well as the autonomic nervous system dynamic. So, the autonomic nervous system, for any of our non nurse friends or non medical friends, it actually is controlling a lot of the unconscious processes of our body, our heart rate, our blood pressure, even our breathing. So, we're mostly unconsciously breathing. And it's split up into two areas, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic, you've probably heard, is more the fight and flight, and the parasympathetic is our rest and digest. And ideally, our bodies should be able to flow and bounce back and forth from one side to the next based upon what is needed in our situation at hand. But the other piece, too, is heart rate variability is really talking about the heart and brain interaction. And I feel like that's a huge piece that's been long forgotten. So it's not necessarily new information, But a big piece is that the heart and brain, they communicate to each other. But I feel like we've historically been told that our brain communicates to our heart. Like, you read thoughts in our head and that carries over to our body. And even though that is true, the heart itself, it actually communicates to the brain 9 times more frequently than the brain communicates to the heart. And it also communicates with our spinal cord as well. So what is really interesting is how much our heart not only just affects our brain, but it's also affecting our autonomic nervous system.
Heart rate variability is reported out on these different wearables is in a number. And so there is a pretty wide range of what that number is. It could be somewhere from 20 milliseconds to over 200 milliseconds. That number is measured by the time or the interval between your heart, and how high or how low is an indicator of your body's readiness and response to stress. So a higher number is considered more positive for you. Your body is more primed to be able to handle different aspects of stress. And a lower number indicates need for rest and recovery. So on a more basic level, certain things like men tend to have higher heart rate variability numbers than women do.
What's interesting is that I recall learning that we wanted our heart rate to be consistent, that we didn't
Yes.
think variability historically. Clearly, our audience hopefully is in our time range here. We did not want variability. So interesting
Yes,
enough.
that's called atrial fibrillation. That's an arrhythmia. What do you mean? And that's something that I also, in my head, when I read that, I was like, I don't understand. I don't understand how having more variability shows a better ability to respond to stress.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it was interesting because our heart rate actually changes with our heartbeats. They're not necessarily always in sync to each other, but you actually do want a higher heart rate variability. And your heart rate variability will go down naturally as we age, which I guess isn't too much of a surprise. It's everything else that changes as we age. But what I thought was huge is that heart rate variability itself is an independent risk factor for health problems for all cause mortality, which is pretty massive. I mean, obviously, yes, stress is a big indicator, but stress is associated with an underlying cause, you could say, of a lot of the all cause mortality: inflammation, diabetes, heart failure, cancers, especially when we live in a society where I feel like stress is almost like an accepted norm badge of honor. So being that the heart is so integral and it almost has its own little nervous system in there that's communicating with the rest of our body. And one of the pieces that HeartMath really talks about is coherence. And coherence is not relaxation. They define coherence, or coherence is defined in physics, that it implies order, harmony, and connection within and among systems. And the systems can be an atom, it could be people, it could be a team, it could be an organ, it can be society. So that's the definition of coherence in itself.
That to me is really how we should be defining health. Why are we not defining health in this way? Read that again.
Sure. So this is just the physics definition of coherence. It implies order, harmony, and connection within and among systems.
And our body is so many different systems that are interrelated and impact one another. So that alignment and that coherence between systems is where you feel good, where you're thriving.
We even can go deeper because you'll have a personal coherence and even a heart coherence. So if we're looking at our heart rate variability, yes, we're measuring heart rate variability, but what we're looking for is to work on our heart coherence or our physiological coherence. And what that actually does is increase our own self-regulatory system, or as we could say going back, right? It's the harmony and order within our organ system. Because if we have that coherence, and just going back, our heart communicates to our brain as well as our nervous system. Our heart communicates to our brain, and it also communicates using the vagus nerve as well and the spinal cord. So having that coherence really helps the higher level of brain functions. It helps bring yourself to that rest and digest state. It helps improve your focus. It can help improve your reaction time. And that's just all on your own physiological level, which if you have your physiological coherence, cool, we then hopefully can move into our own personal coherence, which I really loved this definition. It was order, harmony, and stability in the various rhythmic activities within the living system over a period of time. And I like that because we're taking these numbers and we can't just look at one number and make a decision, especially something with like heart rate variability. You look over time, right? You want to establish a pattern over time. You're not just saying that I got this one number and that's it. So once we've looked at this pattern, and if we work on our own heart rate variability and increasing it, our nervous system and our body becomes more self-regulated. And once our physiological body becomes more self-regulated, our system starts to work together in more harmony. And I'll use the statement over a period of time, as in this isn't a one and done thing. This is something that we're really looking at and can be used to overall help our quality of life.
What really drew me to start monitoring and trending my heart rate variability was the different things that actually impact it outside of your genetics, your gender, but it was a combination of physical things such as exercise, nutrition, hydration, sleep, but also the aspects of stress reduction through breath work, gratitude practicing, journaling. So it really did not point to one thing to do. It really talked about a combination of how you can coordinate your lifestyle to improve your health and give you a number. And I like data. I like trends. That's just an aspect of me. So when I first started to look at it, my numbers were in the high 20s, like 27. And so I asked my husband, so what's your numbers? And he was like, oh, 75. Well, one of us is in trouble. And I automatically assumed he was in trouble. He was not in trouble. I'm over here raising my hand. I feel like I'm the one focusing on health. He's doing whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a bad score. This is a
Well,
really bad score.
then let's put this in perspective here, right? You're former military. You are in shape, right? By every aspect of the world, right? We look at you and Julie is quote unquote healthy and in her prime.
Yes, by certain numbers, but not by rate variability. So I was like, what do I do? How do I fix this? And it really was aspects that, yes, movement and exercise, but types of movement and exercise can't be all hardcore marathon training, weight training, hit training. I had to do more low impact. I had to do some yoga. I had to do Pilates, walking, not running. So that piece was it. But it was also, I have to get my head in order. I have to get my head and my heart in order. And if I don't, all the other stuff will only take me so far. And apparently that was 27, which is not a good indicator, right? It's
Yes, in
low.
case
That's
anyone
pretty
missed it,
low.
27 the low number.
And so I have started to try to adjust my lifestyle to incorporate lots of different aspects and watch that number. And over time, now my number is like 42. So I have been able to increase my heart rate variability slowly over time. I still have days when I'm 32, when I'm low, but I also have had some days where I'm 75. And so that trend of moving up tells me, okay, the things that I'm doing that are really nourishing and devoting to myself do have an impact.
So, one, happy to hear this will be our last podcast episode. Taking the numbers away for a minute, noting how you feel in your day to day life now compared to how you felt when you were a 27, what's changed?
Well, I would say overall, I do feel like I have more energy. During the work week, I come home and I don't feel like I have to just shovel food in my face and collapse. I'm able to do things after work, take a walk with my husband around the block, play with the kids, go out with the dog, record a podcast, read, those kinds of things. I have created a change in my lifestyle where I have more space and time, but I also have the energy to do those things. And I feel like being able to do those things reinforces the spiritual, the emotional aspects of life that improve the quality of my life.
And I think what you touched on here too is that your personal coherence really bled over into your family's system and your relationship. And there is social coherence. And social coherence can be couples or families, groups or teams. But this is when a group is coherent, they're in harmony and an alignment. And the relationship allows for the efficient flow of energy and communication required for the collective purpose. And I wanted to circle back to how our physiological and personal coherence bleed over into the social. So our heart itself, it's magnetic. So anyone who doesn't know, if you do an EEG or reading those brain waves that are the waves that are in your brain, you're doing an EKG, you're reading those waves on the heart, but they actually can measure the magnetic field that's outside of you to a certain point. Our field probably could be larger. It's just a certain point that they have figured out at this period of time. But we do have this magnetic field, but that magnetic field that's around us, it carries our emotional state. And in some studies, they've actually shown that each emotion carries a different heart rate variability. So, like anger is a very low heart rate variability, but appreciation is a much higher heart rate variability.
That I
And
didn't know.
yes,
That's
yeah,
really fascinating.
it is connected with our emotions. So, the one study that I think is just a fun study to talk about, it's the boy and his dog. So pretty much the boy and the dog were in their room together, just the two of them. And the boy knew one of these heart techniques. I think they called it heart lock-in technique by HeartMath. I think that was the one that was used. And that's one where he just focused on this emotion and held it. And they actually measure the heart rate variability of the boy and the dog separately. And they were not touching, he was not engaging with the dog, but you could actually see the heart rate variability change once he was starting that heart lock in technique, not just for him, but for the dog as well. So his dog was feeling the emotions that he was basically bringing out without any physical touch or any physical action. And that is why that gratitude practice you mentioned is so important. And gratitude, it's not just checking the box of I'm grateful for this and this. It is also getting that feeling inside. Like, why are you so grateful? What's igniting in you when you're grateful? And you get that feeling of the gratitude or joy and appreciation, and you physically feel it protected by our nervous system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You could utilize that in so many different ways when you're working with other people. or you're meeting people, how you open things up, taking the time to really recognize the people in the room with you and extending that feeling of gratitude towards those people to start that coherence in the room. I don't want it to make it sound calculating. If you're calculated, then it's not going to work. But if you're genuine and you're able to work that muscle of recognizing what people are bringing and that they matter to you, I think that can really elevate the group. And that shows that actually you can.
Well, it sounds very much what you're speaking of is co-regulation. And the yogic technology, we use our breath for co-regulation. And we did a exercise where you had one person be really upset and the other person just keep the long, deep breathing. Interestingly enough, the person that was upset relatively quickly de-escalated. When you think about it, think about how many times you have a heated conversation and people start feeding up each other. I'm heated, you're heated, and we're feeding off of each other, right? This is how complaining starts and anger starts and all those things. What if one person did not engage and we just did that long, deep breathing? And what ends up happening, right? My heart rate's lower, my breathing's lower, and eventually yours comes with it. And that's co-regulation.
As a nurse leader, I think about sometimes when I have people come into my office and they're upset about something, and naturally how I can help somebody settle. The first thing that I really have to do is settle myself.
Another one on a heart match where they had 4 people in a room and 3 of the people, I think, were using one of the techniques, and the 4th person didn't know anything about it. They had them all hooked up and actually saw the 4th person, who was the quote outlier, basically was brought into coherence with the other 3.
I'm curious because people are hardwired towards the negative. If you had the same situation, but you had somebody who was doing things towards the negative versus the positive, if there's any correlation towards a negative.
I believe there is, because what was the data? Something like you need 5 positives to overcome 1 negative. It's easier to pull everyone down than it is to bring them up.
It doesn't necessarily even need to be in the work environment. It could be in a family environment where you have somebody you have struggles with in a relationship and they're hard to be around. They may be a more negative directed person. How do you regulate that? I think that would be tough.
Well, when I first started my journey into this 5+ years ago, I just remember being very frustrated with my relationship. You know what? One of the things I did is every morning when I got on my mat, I did a heart-centered intention. Now, granted, this was before I really understood the research and the data behind it. I think a part of me just didn't know what else to do. And I just put that intention in play every single day, and I felt it in my heart every single day. Over time, I know that my own personal anger shifted out and my relationship improved because they saw a difference in me as well.
I think that also people tend to go by how they feel, right? And if you're in a situation that is stressful or challenging, knowing that actually, if you continue just do certain practices for yourself, that actually you may be moving the needle more than you realize.
And I think that's the point of this episode, is that the work that you do for yourself matters. And it doesn't just matter for you. It matters for your family, it matters for your relationship, and it does matter for your work environments too. But we'll have to throw in, there was a study, a meta-analysis actually, I think that was done on healthcare workers. And obviously, many of us, there's lots of fatigue. The fatigue is probably, I think, one of the biggest issues that are arising. And there was lots of anger and resentfulness. And by using these practices as a group, they ended up having more energy, improved communication. And with that, there actually was decreased mistakes and some decreased meeting times, which may sound strange. However, if you go back to social coherence, that definition included energy and communication required for the optimal collective purpose. So if you're all more aligned and in coherence, you'll be able to communicate more effectively, more succinctly, come to a conclusion or agreement in a shorter period of time.
Yes, all really great things, all the things that you want. and that people are looking for in different work environments. People are shifting around jobs and things like the work environment, the culture, the team is one of the most important aspects of your work life because you spend so much time with those people. So regulating yourself actually can have a big impact on your team and what you're bringing to that environment and that culture.
It makes me look at change management in a whole different way. I definitely did
Mm.
lots of big changes on the units that I've managed. And it makes me look at this and think, kind of wish I could have done it a little differently, even smoother.
And not necessarily changing the things that you did in putting certain processes into place, but maybe layering other aspects that brings this in on top of the mechanics
Yeah.
of of those changes.
Oh, yes, 100%. Yeah. I'm not saying the changes were wrong or that the
Mhm.
processes were wrong. I'm
Right.
saying that, man, if we included something like
Mm.
this as a real team building, a
There's
little getting to know you games, two faults and a truth, pick the truth.
There's been a lot of work around the why of what you're doing, and that's one piece of it. But then there's the relationships between members of the team and what those relationships are, I think also is uncharted territory when it comes to change management.
And especially in healthcare, where so many people feel like they're not being heard and feel like they're not being cared for, I start to think, what if we took a breath with whoever you're getting a report from for 30 seconds? And what is something like that? And focusing on something joyful before the end of each shift was implemented. I'm curious how that would change things. You actually took a pause. And you didn't just run there and hurry up and getting a report and get out. You just took one long, deep breath. It's like 10 seconds.
Mhm. I'm trying to think of people that I have gotten report from or given report to.
Mhm.
And that's such a culture shift if
Sure.
you did that together.
Yes.
Because at the end of your shift, you want there to be recognition of the work and the connection and what you did to serve your patients, right? When you're beginning your shift, there's the hope that you really honor and serve the patient as
Mhm.
well, that it goes smooth and that you're able to do the things that you want and you need to do for your patient to somehow capture that recognition and appreciation for what was done
Mhm.
and the blessing for the future state of what you want, what everybody always wants for their patient, which is good care. That would be, that's like the unicorn.
I
Can
believe
you imagine walking into an ICU and you have this patient who's just sick as snot? And you're like, I know I'm walking into a train wreck.
Yep.
And the person comes out and you can see it that they have been through
Exhausted.
hell.
You know what
And
that
being
reminds
able
me of? It reminds me of when I was finishing a night shift and I had two patients who were essentially one-to-ones. And I had the two nurses come up and the first words out of their mouth were like, "Oh my God, I am so sorry. How the heck did you get through this shift?" I'm like,
or
I don't know.
but what if they had said something like, "Man, you made," and they're still here
And you know what?
doing work.
All right, let's just take a nice breath and have some nice gratitude that the shift is over and the cavalry has arrived. And
Yes. And here's the baton. And I wish you God's
yes, she went.
go be amazing because I know you are. I don't know if that's realistic, but wow, that would be kind of
Well, there's
amazing
realistic,
handoff.
and then there's also what's within our circle of control. And I think this is something that I feel like with every unit I managed, people missed is that people wanted things to change. And a lot of it was focused on wanting these other people to change. And the unfortunate reality is we can't live our lives hoping someone else changes, but we can change ourselves.
We've talked a lot about what heart rate variability is and different things that impact it. We could take this down so many different paths, Trish, that we could be here for hours, but we don't have hours. It would be pretty cool if we polled our audience to see what would they like us to research more and bring to them about ways that they can impact their heart rate variability. That could be breath work. It could be any number of things. Take a look into the show notes and we will have a poll ready for you. We are really looking forward to getting some feedback and wanting to learn what you want to know more about. And we'll do more episodes about those different topics.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Trish.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend. Want to learn more about a specific topic? Drop us a line on our website and we can explore it deeper with you.